Okay, let's wait for a minute. Okay, I think we can start. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you for joining. We have 3,000 people registered, which is great, which shows great interest in the event. And I want to remind why exactly are we doing this event? Well, as you can see, the neurotech field is currently dominated by medical industry, research industry, like wellness applications. And if you think about what technologies that surround us, most of the things that we have in our apartment, in our house, are brought to us either by military or entertainment. And most of the people I had discussions with, like from CEOs to developers, when I asked them, what would you do with a highly advanced brain computer interface that can read and stimulate neurons, most of them answer that they would go into medical field. So everyone is very, very biased because their field of neurotech gaming is very, very new. And today's talk, today's event purpose is to show that there are already leaders in this field who are making big things, and we're going to present them today for you and to show that it is really an unexplored niche in terms of investments, in terms of business opportunities, in terms of careers, in terms of anything really, game development. It's good for both industries, and the medical industry is going to benefit hugely from if gaming industry becomes one of the main drivers for the technology. So without further ado, let me welcome Yannick Roy, our host for today. Yannick.
Hi, everyone. So I'm definitely excited for day 2 of this Neurotech Gaming conference. So yesterday we had a lot of attendees engagement questions, over 150 questions yesterday that overwhelmed our team, but they were ready for it. So we had an amazing day. The Neurobar even went until, I think, close to 6 p.m. in Montreal, started at 1. So that's a 5-hour event from the talks to the Neurobar afterwards. So definitely excited to see what we have in bank for today. So just for those who, well, if you were here yesterday, please, can you mention it in the chat? Let us know that you're coming back from the second day that you liked yesterday and that you're as well eager for today. So a couple of rules for the event. The idea behind Neurotech and gaming. Neurotech is a wide terminology, if I can say. So neuro, brain, nervous system. So we'll navigate through different things, AR, VR, EEG, eye tracking, perhaps motion capture, things like that. So we're going to navigate in different era because obviously they all come together to enhance the experience, but we'll try to stick more into nervous system and really Neurotech BCI because this is the main audience of Neurotech X. So the idea here is that we put the framework. It's not necessarily just a lecture. The audience is as much part of the event as the speakers. So please, if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have things to share, papers, products, things like that, please, by all means, share that with the people. And on social media as well, use the hashtag Neurotech Gaming 2020 so that we can create a stream of awesome resources in the field so that someone participating to the event can go that and get as much value as possible. So without waiting too much, I'll dive right into what's going to be interesting today. So we have 3 amazing speakers. We do have, in order, it's going to be Erin Reynolds from Flying Mollusk that will kick off the day. Then we'll have Adam Molnar from Nurible, and then we'll end with Eric Lloyd from Brink Bionics. So after that, we'll jump into a Q&A section where we'll ask questions, and then it's going to be more of a conversation with the panelists and the audience. So with no further ado, I think I'll let Erin kick off the event today. So if you want to take the mic and share your screen, and I will stop sharing mine. And
all right,
Erin, take it away.
Great. So let me get some fancy slides. All right, can everyone see that okay? All right, thumbs up of approval. Excellent. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I am so excited to share a little bit about my work and my vision for effective gaming and neurotechnology in gaming from the standpoint of an indie game developer who has been interested in this space for many years. So my name is Erin Reynolds. I am the founder and creative director of a very small independent game development studio based in Los Angeles called Flying Mollusk. And our focus at Flying Mollusk is to make what we call edgy games for good, which means that we're dedicated to creating video games that are the same rich, fun, memorable experiences that you'd expect from any high quality traditional gaming experience. But they also give back to the players or the community in some way, shape, or form, whether it's by surreptitiously teaching a new skill or creating awareness around an important topic, maybe inspiring positive action, things like that. And to do this, we look towards integrating incredible technology that's now available to developers, things like virtual reality, biofeedback, neurofeedback, etc. So I'll be sharing my thoughts on neurotechnology and gaming from the perspective of a creative, someone who really likes putting together all the pieces to create experiences for players to enjoy and hopefully benefit from. So with that, at Flying Mollusk, we're most well known for a game called Nevermind. Nevermind is a biofeedback enhanced adventure thriller game in which you play as a neuroprober. And a neuroprober is a fictional psychologist of the not too distant future who works with people who have experienced psychological trauma or PTSD. Specifically, your fictional clients are folks who have experienced a traumatic event at some point in their lives and their conscious minds couldn't quite process what exactly happened. So as a result, the memories of the trauma have become repressed deep within the client's psyche. So it's up to you, the neuroprober, to delve into each client's psyche, and each client is a different level in the game, to recover those forgotten memories of what happened to them. And to do so, you must brave a landscape that's become dark and surreal as these repressed memories have plagued it over the years. And by solving the puzzles and paying attention to every detail around you, by the end of the level, you should have enough clues to reconstruct the narrative of the trauma, and if you're successful, release the memory to the client. And then from there, the client can start to work through what happened to them and begin the process of healing. So the trick with Nevermind is that when you play it with one of our supported biofeedback technologies, the game can pick up potential indications of feelings of fear or stress or anxiety and respond to those in real time. And the more stressed the game thinks you are, the more punishing the environments around you become. And as you start to relax, the game will become more forgiving. So in this way, Nevermind is kind of like a stress management tool in disguise. The game challenges players to not only become more mindful of those subtle sensations of anxiety and stress, but to also practice and habituate whichever techniques work best for them, for each individual player in managing those feelings of stress. And so ultimately, and hopefully, helping the player develop skills that will help them become successful both in the game and the real world as well. So for a little bit more context, here is the trailer. Hopefully the video works. If it doesn't, let me know.
Rated M for mature.
Lord, I don't know why this is happening to me. I was the perfect little girl.
They have yet to fix us. But that's why we're here.
I know I'm not alone. I know I can get help if I ask.
right, so, oops. There we go. So the Windows and the Mac version of Nevermind was released in September of 2015. And then we released an enhanced version for Windows and Mac in the fall of 2016. And that launch also included Oculus Rift and HTC Vive support. And then in early 2017, we released a non-biofeedback version of the game on Xbox One. And so Nevermind actually started as my master's thesis in 2011 at the University of Southern California. And at that point in time, biofeedback and neurofeedback technology had just become somewhat available at the consumer level. So we started by looking at using heart rate and heart rate variability, to be specific, to find indications of stress in near real time in the players. We did explore more traditional neurofeedback like EEG sensors, both at that time and throughout the Nevermind's development over the years. However, we ended up actually not using neurofeedback with Nevermind for a couple of reasons. Primarily the types of data that neurofeedback could provide, especially at that point in time, things like levels of focus and concentration, wasn't a perfect match for what we were looking for in Nevermind. And we were, more interested in detecting indications of elevated psychological arousal, for which heart rate and heart rate variability felt like a more natural fit. And also the technology at the time wasn't really readily consumer available, whereas simple heart rate monitors were, at least to some extent. Anyway, so it turned out that the Garmin Cardio chest strap with Ant Plus USB sticks was the kind of sensor that we could work with back in 2011 and 2012. And this is because it was really the only device we could find that we could afford as students and we could easily find in stores. It was something that we could integrate with the Unity 3D engine via an Ant Plus protocol. And it was relatively unobtrusive for players to use, which is always a plus. And so with a student team of about 10 people and a number of advisors who were very generous with their support and time, over the course of an academic year, we created a proof of concept. And then we all graduated. But about a year later, motivated by the positive attention that the student prototype was getting from the games and the health and technology sectors, and a personal desire, of course, to continue to work on it, I founded Flying Mollusk. And so from there, we rebuilt that student version from the ground up. And of course, by that time, heart rate-based biofeedback devices had become much more prevalent. So we were able to build in support for more heart rate sensors than just the Garmin chest strap. And in fact, we were even able to partner with Intel to collaborate on integrating their RealSense technology, which was absolutely amazing. And then shortly after the initial release of the commercial version of Nevermind in 2015, we were able to work with a company called Affectiva to integrate their powerful emotion SDK with Unity. And what was really cool about Affectiva's plugin was that it allowed the game to detect the player's microfacial movements through standard webcam and analyze what emotion those expressions possibly indicated in real time. And that was really exciting for two reasons. One, it meant that biofeedback could be more accessible to gaming than ever, because with the integration of Affectiva's technology, instead of needing a separate device that reads heart rate, the emotion-based biofeedback could be accessed with nothing more than a standard webcam. And of course, many gamers already happen to have webcams. Also, it meant that Nevermind could now sense a wide gamut of player input, both psychological arousal and valence. And the valence aspect was something that wasn't really possible with heart rate sensors alone. So with the addition of Affectiva's SDK, Nevermind could respond to two types of perceived player responses: psychological arousal through heart rate, from which we would calculate an approximation of heart rate variability, which is a really good indicator of psychological arousal, so meaning how amped up the player is. And emotion through Affectiva's Unity SDK, which is a good indicator of valence. And valence is, essentially, is the player feeling happy or relaxed or uncomfortable or frustrated, kind of the quality of the emotion input, to very, very simply put it. And again, I know that this is a neurotech event, and here I am talking about heart rate and emotion input. However, as I see it, it's all part of the same family. And the only reason why neurofeedback wasn't ultimately part of the Nevermind suite of supported technologies is that it just wasn't a fit for Nevermind. However, I think it can be equally as important and effective in elevating gaming experiences as any of the technologies we've worked with in Nevermind. And I think so many of the challenges that face the integration of these technologies in indie and mainstream gaming apply across the board, whether we're talking about heart rate-based biofeedback, affective technology, or neurofeedback. And I see so much potential in this space that I think tackling these challenges head on is a really important and smart thing to do. So with that, I want to take a really quick step back to talk about why neurotechnology like neurofeedback, biofeedback, emotion detection, all that is important for gaming. So if you look at the basic history of games, you start out with a very basic input, maybe like a button and a joystick, just a couple of options to interact with the game. And then as gaming technology evolved, you get a gamepad, a controller that has a couple more buttons. So this gives the players more options for ways to, kind of become part of the gaming experience. And then as they evolve, you start to get controllers with even more buttons, in some cases more buttons than you have fingers. And that gives the players even more of this dynamic range of ways of becoming involved with the game and directing what happens with it and inserting themselves in it. And then from there, you get things like gesture control, touch control through smartphones and other technologies like that. And touch is such a natural input without the abstraction of a controller. So you start to see this trend of, seeing players want to have this more intimate, kind of two-way conversation with the gaming experiences. So, to me, it seems that biofeedback, neurofeedback is a very natural extension of this step. It's sort of the natural next step for gaming. And so, obviously I'm a huge fan of biofeedback and neurofeedback technology, and I evangelize it whenever I can. However, I'm often asked, well, Erin, this is all philosophically well and good, but practically speaking, how can this really be used in, a traditional everyday game? And to that, I often say, well, there are a ton of ways, more ways than we can even know right now. And as someone who has been working in games for over 15 years and interested in games using this kind of technology for the vast majority of those years, I have about 1,000 ideas and even still feel like I haven't even scratched the surface. So I want to spend some time very briefly touching on just how powerful I think biofeedback and neurofeedback can be in gaming. So let's start with the notion of games that can simply automatically respond to a player's internal state. How they're feeling, are their thoughts scattered, are they calm, are they agitated, things like that. And so instead of relying wholly on the player to direct the state of the game through consciously pressing buttons, the game can now spontaneously react to the player's state of mind at any moment, perhaps even picking up on elements of the player's mood that maybe the player wasn't even aware of. And adaptive gameplay, whether it's actively or passively, as has been mentioned in some of the earlier talks, is something that is a very natural fit for this. So for example, players could interact with a character not only by using pre-written dialogue options, but maybe also via subtle movements and internal sensations. Maybe it's the slight arch of an eyebrow, in an expression of disbelief, or a grin of approval, or a spike in heart rate with excitement, or increased mental effort, perhaps signaling confusion. This screenshot is from the Mass Effect series. Obviously, Mass Effect games don't use this type of technology, at least not that I know of. But these screenshots hopefully help emphasize the point that this technology could be very effective and frankly, very cool, not just in weird experimental games like Nevermind, but potentially more traditional games as well. Or maybe on a more subtle level, things like digital environments could colorfully blossom in response to the player's happiness or become more muted when the player expresses tension. These are screenshots from the popular game Heavy Rain, in which you can access this alternate reality where you can change the environment to help put you at ease. Heavy Rain doesn't actually use technology like this again, but just imagine a game sort of automatically adapting in this way. So biofeedback, affective, and neurofeedback technology empowers games to dynamically adapt on the fly. And this can be used in overt ways, as alluded to in the previous slides, or a little bit more under the hood. And the easiest example of this, I think, is the game's difficulty adjusting on the fly. So, essentially, as a player exhibits signs of frustration, the game becomes easier. As the player exhibits signs of boredom, the game becomes harder. And this dynamic response to the player's emotional and physiological state can help maintain the player in a state of flow, which is basically just a fancy way of saying keeping the player in the zone. which is what you want as a game designer, because a player that is in this flow state is a player who is engaged and having fun. And I know the discussion of flow state and the use of neurotechnology is something that came up multiple times in yesterday's talks. And I think that's great and important, because it is such a natural fit that I think, you know, it can be elegantly applicable to almost any game, which is pretty cool. And to get really, really behind the scenes and under the hood, there is, of course, the power of using neurofeedback, biofeedback, and affective technology to gather incredibly valuable player analytics, data on how the player's behavior to help optimize gameplay. And of course, this would have to be done ethically and responsibly. But you know, just imagine with this technology, things can be detected and roughly quantified, you know, to get a sense of what's going on with the player. And, you know, I'm talking about signals that are maybe unperceivable to the observer and the player themselves. You know, valuable insights can be gathered in a manner that isn't disruptive to the gameplay experience itself. And with those insights, developers can gain incredibly important perspectives on how to make the experience even more fun and even more satisfying. This data could illuminate things like what is giving the player joy or fulfillment or happiness, or what's upsetting or confusing or frustrating the player, what areas are boring, what areas are exciting. And that's just amazingly powerful. And these are just a few very basic, simple examples of how the integration of effective technology like biofeedback and neurotechnology in video games is so elegantly good for the player and good for the developer and good for business. And let's just be honest, just plain cool. Consumer available technology is out there and the development tools are out there. So, you know, why hasn't this taken off? I mean, every game of every genre and platform can benefit from it. So why is it currently only in just a very small handful of games? Well, one theory is that the technology currently available on a consumer level isn't ready, that the results that they provide just aren't as accurate as ideal. However, I don't think that this is actually the primary challenge before us, or at least it shouldn't be, because the thing about using this technology for entertainment gaming is that it doesn't actually need to be 100% accurate. For entertainment gaming experiences, the most important thing is for it to be accurate enough for it to feel right to players, for the player to be able to see enough cause and effect between their internal state and how the game responds. And so for that, medical grade technology is overkill, because in most gaming contexts, the fidelity and accuracy of medical grade sensors would most likely be pretty imperceivable after a certain point. So I don't think that the lack of sophisticated technology is really what's preventing neurotech gaming from taking off. I think the technology available now already offers a really great starting point. So here's my theories based on my experience with Nevermind. So a lot of people don't even know that this technology exists in an accessible, tangible form. You know, many times I'll be having a conversation with someone and I'll bring up Nevermind, the type of technology it uses, and they don't believe it. They don't believe it exists or that it actually works. And so for a lot of folks, this is all something of science fiction of the future, or this type of technology is something that's only found in expensive labs that they'll never have access to. And this assumption applies both to consumers and developers. When I tell developers that they can relatively easily integrate this kind of technology into their games, even just a simple plugin for the popular Unity engine in some cases, their minds are kind of blown. And then from there, they often get really excited about all the possibility it could mean for them in their games. And that's cool, but it's also indicative of a real problem, because as long as this technology is seen as something of science fiction, people, you know, consumers and game developers are not going to take it seriously as a science reality. And that means that there will be fewer games that can show off its capabilities and drive the technology forward, and the less demand amongst consumers for its integration, which then you know, would lead to eventually mass availability. So you know, another reason it hasn't quite caught on despite its great potential is, and then this really should come as a surprise to no one, is that the technology is an additional cost for consumers. Some of the technology available is, you know, relatively inexpensive. And one of the things that I thought was so brilliant about Effectiva's effective technology was that it only required a webcam, which most gamers already have by default. However, a lot of devices out there for biofeedback and neurofeedback aren't super cheap. And going back to my first point, if the majority of people don't realize what they're missing out on, then they're definitely not going to want to make the investment in owning the technology. And finally, the truth of the matter is that there just isn't a lot of development support for users of this technology in mainstream or indie video game development. And not to put too fine a point on it, but by support, I specifically mean project funding. Because making games to be released commercially is a really, really expensive endeavor. And it's been my observation that the reason for a general lack of interest amongst project funders in the gaming space, people like game publishers, for example, their lack of interest in products that integrate this kind of technology is largely a combination of the previous 2 points. And it really is a bit of a chicken and the egg problem. Developers need funding to make content. Funders need a viable market and user base to justify the investment. And then users want to see exciting content to be convinced to spend their time and money on the technology. So, what is the solution to all of these issues? Well, it's a really complex issue, and one that other technologies in gaming, like virtual reality, are also trying to figure out. And I don't know what the solution is, to be honest. It's something that we wrestle with as we try to figure out for ourselves how to fund our own projects around this kind of technology and get new games out there. So I can only imagine how daunting it must feel for developers who are just starting to explore working in this space. But what I do know is that the integration of this technology in video games is inevitable. Getting from here to there will just require some patience and perseverance and all of us working together to continue to think outside the box. Because there are so many possibilities, and the kinds of ideas that I've been talking about are really just only scratching the surface. It's truly just a matter of using our imaginations and insight to usher gaming into this new era of interaction. It's really not a question of if, but when, and it will lead to some truly amazing experiences for developers and players alike in the years to come. So in short, it's a really cool time to be part of the future. Thank you.
This was such an amazing talk. Thank you very much for that. Talking about the technology, the field, the future, being inspiring. I think that you covered it all. We do have some questions from the audience. Obviously, I'm gonna just limit the one that seems to be relevant now with the momentum and targeted more to you, and we'll keep the general question at the end for the Q&A. So we have Stefan Eduardo Luch Espinosa on Zoom asking, if you had to make a sequel to Nevermind, what other features would you focus on, especially since Neurotech has widely exploded ever since 2011 when you started on Nevermind?
Yeah, I mean, the technology is always evolving. So there's a bunch of stuff that has come out since we released Nevermind or came out near the end of the development cycle of Nevermind that we just couldn't fully integrate. So, obviously I'd love to re-explore neurotechnology and EEG-based sensors, because there's a lot more options to work with now. And I think, now that Nevermind is out there, if we'd make a sequel, we'd build in things that could use that data as well. We have some ideas for that. We played a little bit with eye tracking in Nevermind. So if you played Nevermind with the Tobii eye sensor, you can also access eye tracking features. Again, that technology wasn't available until pretty late in our development cycle, so we weren't able to implement all the ideas we had for it. So again, I'd love to go back and design the game from the ground up, knowing that. So really, we'll take everything and anything that's come out since then and find cool ways to integrate it, because there's a lot of fun toys out there now.
Awesome. But as you said, the money is also an aspect. I remember one takeaway from the presentation is definitely the cat with money. I think that's definitely a takeaway, that slide. On a more technical side of things, a lot of people are asking questions about which platform is it compatible with? Does this work with VR? What engine? So do you want to just go on a bit more on the technical aspect of things of the game?
Absolutely. So Nevermind, you can download for on Steam for Mac and PC. You can play it without any of the extra technology, and it's more of a classical game, adventure thriller game at that point. But we do support a number of off-the-shelf sensors. Our goal was to be able to support as many as possible, so that people wouldn't have to buy something new for Nevermind. So if you happen to have a polar chest strap, or you happen to have a Well-Divine Ion PE, then you can just use it with Nevermind. And many of those sensors, especially the heart rate based ones, will work with VR. So you can play Nevermind, for example, wearing the Garmin Cardio chest strap and the Oculus Rift or the Vive. And so if you just go to the easiest way to kind of see like what we support and kind of how it all fits together, is just go to the website, nevermindgame.com. There's a tab for sensors that lists all the heart rate sensors we support, and then a tab called tech, I think, that lists also the emotion support and kind of how which ones are compatible with each other.
This is awesome. A question a bit more personal, but thank you very much for asking the question, Claudia. In general, how do you experience being a woman in neurotech? And I would even add in the gaming industry as well.
Yeah, it's a really good question. You know, I've been very fortunate in my career in that I've had lots of really wonderful mentors, you know, both male and female developers and technology enthusiasts who have been super supportive. And so, you know, my experience has been, it's interesting because I have seen the game development industry evolve. You know, when I first started, I was often one of the only women in a room or, you know, at an event or something. And now that's changing rapidly. I'm seeing so much diversity around me grow. And so it's been really inspiring. And I'm very encouraged by the direction that it is going in. And so, you know, I'm hoping that just continues to build momentum because, you know, I've also seen that the more diverse voices we get in technology and gaming leads to more diverse ideas and more innovation. And so it's only going to like just make everything better that the more people come into it. So I'm very encouraged and I hope that other women and you know, minorities kind of getting into this space are able to enjoy the same supportive environment that I was, because it really is just a cool place to be working. And yeah, it's been fun.
I love it. We could definitely dive deeper in that subject, as Neurotech X as well have just formed a diversity committee trying to address that question, see how we can impact and what kind of initiative we could do to support that. So yeah, definitely we could dive in. We might actually re-invite you for some of the activity on that in that direction for sure.
Absolutely.
But for now, I want to, since we have an amazing day with the 3 speakers, I will go to the next one with Adam Molnar from Nurible. Nurible is best known for their VR EEG headset, but they are now going into the everyday BCI. So Adam, do you want to take it away before I spoil any of the information coming? So you can unmute yourself, share your screen, and the floor is yours.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Hi, my name is Adam Molnar. I'm one of the co-founders and head of partnerships of Nurible. First of all, what an amazing presentation, Aaron. I won't even try to echo the amount of nuggets of gold that were expressed throughout that presentation, but just kudos to you. And then again, my hat off to Neurotech X. I don't know how many people truly appreciate the impact of this organization, but my company alone has hired several people through their efforts, and I've seen their growth from a very, very, very small group to the thousands global international group that it is today. So without further ado, I want to kick off this presentation and explain my role in all of this. Is that as head of partnerships for Nurible, what I've been trying to do is achieve value with BCI technology in ways that aren't necessarily known. So this presentation is largely about using real world examples to show the growth and direction of where BCI has been, where it is today, and where it's going. So I know that there are a lot of people on this call, which is an amazing testament to Neurotech X's involvement in the field. But just so that everyone has some working understanding, I think a base explanation is required. That what is a brain-computer interface? Simply, it is a way for a computer to acquire brain signal that it then understands in an algorithmic or signal processing manner that then shoots back to an application to be experienced by the end user or entity involved. And this is where typically brain science, neurotechnology, neuroscience lives in the current zeitgeist of our times, but it doesn't have to be. This is a 64 wet electrode array that is largely used for research. And in my opinion, brain-computer interfaces value will be largely achieved when it can actually leave the laboratory. Similarly, what we have in front of us is the Apple Lisa, which was such a monumental piece of technology. See, computing had existed for years before Apple helped make the Apple Lisa move from a computer that had to be fed with punch cards and very specialized knowledge to feature a graphical user interface, a keyboard and mouse that allowed less technical individuals to actually operate and take value away from the system. And then we jump again decades later with the smartphone and Apple making the capacitive touchscreen the standard for smartphone technology. And it wasn't until then that we really see this explosive growth. And we should all understand and appreciate that smartphone technology existed years before Apple made the capacitive touchscreen the standard. But it wasn't until we had this companion interaction, if you will, until we saw that explosive growth, which leads us to this path that we see here in this general evolution of interfaces, that when we're presented with a new computing medium, there is often a companion interaction paradigm that associates that mass shift, that makes it a technology that requires specialized knowledge and experience that is more accessible to the lay user, and then the mass attainment of value. So with this pattern, not only do we see this evolution, but we also see the distance between human and machine actually becoming more narrow, to a point where we're actually touching and speaking with our devices. And to some degree, even now, and especially in the near future, our devices corroborating directly with our brain. But before we jump into all of that, I think it is respectful to the field to nod to yesterday, especially in regards to gaming. And here on this slide, what we see is the NeuroSky Force Trainer, which they released in 2010. I think it's amazing that they were able to sign a deal with Mattel, bring down the price point for a neurotechnology to, I believe it was $90 when it launched. And it was a relative success, and especially captured a brand like Star Wars to bring neuroscience to what I'll even consider STEM education for kids. And just so that we can appreciate how early they were, I'm going to play this quick video.
I think that we're not hearing the sound, so I don't know, Adam, if the sound was relevant.
Oh no, that's awful. So that was the only video really with sound. But basically, you have this reporter saying, here is a toy that presents mind over matter. And for the first time, we're seeing a neurotechnology in the mainstream, which is a sentiment that I'd like to echo throughout the presentation. Hat off to NeuroSky for being a pioneer in the field. And now I'm sure a lot of people on this call will recognize this game that isn't exactly a brain-computer interface, but I think represents a critical aspect of how we consider what I'll get to later, but it's this effective computing interactions timeline. And the Stanley Parable, it's a narrative-based game where you have the narrator essentially dictating the story to you in real time based on the decisions that you're making. I think this is actually pretty similar to the work of Flying Mollusk, although it was released in 2011. And one of the feelings that you get from playing this game is that the narrator is actually reading your mind, that it's this surreal experience, and it was all accomplished with basic logic, that all it was taken into account was a timer, where your character was looking and what you were activating. And then lastly, just a very interesting piece of research, Graz University, a leading university in Austria, they use a laboratory grade setup to apply a basic shoot command to World of Warcraft, a game that we all know and love. So again, these were some of the very early efforts to bring BCI to gaming that I think are symbolic of what needs to happen in the field to come to really reach that full potential. Bringing us to today. So And Nurible, we got our big name back in 2017 when we showcased a demo at SIGGRAPH with our Awakening virtual reality experience. Now, what this is and where my company comes from is we spun out a technology through the University of Michigan's Direct-to-Brain Interface Lab, where we were able to, for the first time, pick up a P300 in near real time with dry sensors, and not just dry sensors, but limited sensors, which we tried to commercialize as an input for virtual reality, a system that would be not even okay to have sensors on the head, but actually kind of cool. So I'll play this quick video and narrate what's going on. So this is my co-founder, Dr. Alcade, presenting a main stage talk at MIT's MTech conference. And what I'm doing is I've been calibrated in this virtual reality headset, the Vive, and using the P300 paradigm, using it to have basic control over objects in front of me. So you can see, it was essentially an escape the room that we developed to showcase some of the interactions made possible with a BCI. So what you can see is I can mentally, with my intention, allow objects that have a stimulus to be selected and then thrown at whatever has a target. A very basic game, but powerful to propel us to where we are today and give us that head start. Something I should say about the Nurible headset is that, and Aaron was talking about this quite a bit, was that we built the form factor with consumer user in mind, but with medical grade sensors. So what we did was we created a technology that was really an amazing experience, but wasn't necessarily practical. That the price point was inhibitive towards getting to a lot of gamers or to even game studios, especially the more creative, smaller ones. But what it was a first take at what is to come, and that with the miniaturization of sensors and capabilities, we'd be able to progress further. And in 2019, at a big conference called Lollapalooza, in partnership with Red Bull's high performance team, we built a game called Neurocasters, which was for essentially esports performance training. And what we see here is this host in the pink about to face off against a famous Twitch streamer known for his speed running, and he annihilates her. But what it is it's using our P300 capability in a basic rock, paper, scissors interaction scheme. So what you can see is red, blue, green, and then blasting off each other. So that's what we did in 2019. And then bringing it to this year, we made a partnership with a company called Brightline Interactive. This is a company that has a history in creating experiences dating back to the first DK1 of the Oculus, and working with the military and also consumer brand installations to really propel the current state of training. So what this is, the video I'm about to show you, it's called PAVE. It's a performance adaptive virtual engine. Aaron touched on the concept, and there was a lot of conversation about this yesterday about flow state-like performance or understanding. And what we did was, when we realized that the so what question we got hit with our P300 interactions efforts hit a wall, we went back to the drawing board, having spoken with the leading OEMs, AAA game studios, and many others to know what were they looking for that they would like to implement now into their repertoire of offers. And time and again, what we heard was interactions are cool right now, but they're not very practical. What is really important is this idea of quantified cognition. So Nurible went back to the drawing board to see what we could do. And we're like, wow, a lot of the signal processing techniques to make dry electrodes a reality and pattern recognition for the P300 can actually be reoriented for quantified cognition. So we then took our efforts towards that domain and looking at things like attention, cognitive load, and fatigue, where what PAVE is doing, it's this engine is taking in various biological streams of data, beginning with hours, to use this to keep an individual in an optimal learning state. What you saw in the video was a basic Stroop task assorted with a real box sorting challenge. And what's happening is as the cognitive load reaches a critical mass, there are real-time changes in the difficulty and speed of the game to keep you in that sweet spot. It's an early application, but it's one that we are having conversations with the leading technology teams across various wings of the military to help people learn more effectively. Now, this slide is both my favorite and least favorite thing to present on because I can't say a ton on the matter, but I can speak high level what it represents, which in my opinion is extremely important. And Yannick touched upon this, and this is the concept of the everyday brain-computer interface, the everyday BCI. I can't say too much, but the idea is simple, that BCI's impact of value will come when it's no longer a one-off or novelty experience, but something that you can come to recurrently and can scale. And this is specifically with the consumer or non-medical end user in mind. You won't have to think in the near future, should I bring my device with me? Am I going to use it today? No, it's just going to be part of your daily routine. And there are a lot of obstacles that we had to overcome in order to get this. And if you want to learn more, please join our newsletter. We'll have announcements coming up in the very near future. But then that brings us to tomorrow. And this is one of the most fun conversations. And I think a very important theme to talk about is really clearly articulating what are the verticals that need to be advanced in order for this telekinetic brain-computer interface future to really be achieved. And what we see here are the idea of hardware, software, social, and experience, all of which themselves are important, but all of which that need to grow cohesively as a collective. Beginning with hardware, what I have presented is Nurible's transition from wet electrodes in a laboratory environment to a research-grade dry sensor product offered by a company called Wearable Sensing, to this is a 7-electrode retrofit for the HTC Vive. And then coming soon is this everyday BCI. And one of the themes to point out here is this miniaturization of sensors, the reduction of sensor number, the ease of use of actually putting on a system where in 2011 and 2015, you need specialized knowledge on setting up the device. But beginning with the DK1 form factor, we're transitioning away from that, and it's still not super simple that you can just put it on and go, but the setup time jumps from 30 minutes to just a couple of minutes, to a point where in the future, you won't even have to think about the setup time, you just put it on and go. Some other aspects of hardware that I think require advancement is cost. That are one of the prohibitive working conditions of our DK1 form factor, the Vive retrofit, was its cost. That we wanted developers to work with it, but it was too expensive to work with it. And monetizing and creating a business on gaming is a very difficult one, especially when you're taking these big, riskier bets. And this becomes even more of an important consideration when you're talking to the original equipment manufacturers and seeing when they'll roll out these sensors in their next line of product. So the more research and development we can have here, and the more investment we'll see a natural transition in hardware to come. But moving on from hardware, and this is a message that I think is especially relevant for the people in attendance here. And obviously all verticals require our cumulative efforts, but software especially is what's going to bring BCI to gaming in an impactful manner. That algorithms need to improve, but not just that, but also the user experience. So we need to, brain data is historically difficult to work with. So on the software side, on the hardware side, we need to make that signal acquisition better. But on the software side, we need to be more efficient with our data understanding and improve these algorithms to provide more meaningful values and measurements. When it comes to user experience, I have relationships with some of the leading institutes on user design in the country. And honestly, they laugh off BCI looking at where it's been in the past. And honestly, they're also just learning now or bringing to the forefront now how to optimize voice for user experience design in a widespread manner. These are all things that need to change if we're going to see this take a huge shift in our field. connected to software is the experience that brain-computer interfaces need to feel good. The experience should delight users. And there are two really large problems that have afflicted our domain in this manner. One is inflated expectations, which honestly, Nurible hasn't been innocent of, especially in our earlier years. That's the idea of claiming that the technology is going to be revolutionary and change everything that we know, and setting expectations so high, and that when it's met by another individual, there's this expectation gap that gets missed, and then there's a lack of trust that exacerbates all of these verticals from advancing. And I think it's important to call out that when a technologist understands the revolutionary aspect of an experience, that's different than when a consumer end user experiences that same technology, because they have different associations with where it's been and where it's going, what it means. And then lastly, or not lastly, but another big problem is this idea of association. That, in my opinion, for BCIs to really kick off and make it to the mainstream, people need to be able to associate and tell that it's working. That they can't be questioning, was that chance, or maybe that was an eye blink versus my actual brainwave. Does it work today versus working tomorrow in an aspect of consistency? These are all very important concepts to keep in mind. And then another idea is this spectrum of interaction control versus effective computing that I'll get to in just a little bit. But one of the verticals that's closest to me that I feel very strongly about is this idea of social. That neurotechnology is not science fiction. If there's one takeaway from my presentation today, from the work that others have done in the past, including Nurible, but many other pioneers in the field, that this technology is real and it is coming. That from my experience, there are people who often think about the future of neuroscience and neurotechnology as negative applications, but there are many more positive applications of this technology than there are negative ones. And it's up to us, people on this call, to handle the technology development intentionally and take an active voice on this in order to bring it to where it needs to be. That as we socialize concepts like neuroscience and brain-computer interfaces to our everyday communication, we'll see the natural evolution of this technology. That if we socialize the concept of a BCI from a point of value and creativity, I believe we'll see its natural growth. And then my last unstated point that really I think should be taken to heart is the idea of neuroethics. That I'd like to see more people in my field talking about it. And Nurible has relationships with some of the people who are starting this conversations, and I can say that we're about to have a more stated voice in the field as well. There's a law professor in Australia who leads thought on this, and there are many think tanks on ethical use of algorithms that I think we can learn from. That I think the field has a lot of opportunity, but a lot of work ahead of it in terms of that. And from the experience domain, I was talking about this control to effective computing spectrum. This is the idea of how we can use a BCI in not just gaming, but in technology and experiences as a whole. That beginning with conscious control, that's me telling a device or a character to move or shoot off a fireball, some of my favorite things to do with a BCI. But all the way to effective computing, where I think the work of Flying Mollusk is especially relevant. I've spoken with some of the leading storytellers from AAA studios that see so many textures of storytelling being unlocked when we can start to confidently and reliably quantify aspects of cognition. That when a computer is able to more intelligently understand the experience of the end user, and now this is where I cite the Stanley Parable, we'll start to have experiences that don't only feel good in terms of control aspect and are new, but are expansive of like what we understand and can appreciate of storytelling. And with that, I end my presentation. Say thank you to all of those in attendance. You are the people who are going to help push this field further, and organizations like Neurotech and many others as well. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Adam. That was a great talk, covering a lot of ground. Thank you very much for the kind words towards Neurotech X. Might have to take the segment where you mentioned that Nurible has hired, or your company, and you've used Neurotech X to hire people. Definitely take that quote. A lot of people were asking technical questions about the intention, the P300. So let's go a little there because not all the audience is very familiar with the BCI aspect of things. So one of the first question was, how complex can be the actions performed in the virtual world with neural input only? How does controlling with intention work? So you want to clarify a little bit with this idea of intention, and then the follow-up question is the P300. So I guess it's kind of linked a little bit. So I'll let you.
I'll try to handle them one question at a time, but let me see what I can do. So I think it's helpful to understand what a P300 is, and also I'll say that I am a non-technical, but have had many conversations about this, and we'll do my best. So the P300 is a subconscious neural response associated with intent. What we did, and when I was showing in the demo, is we see this flash logic. So we cycle a stimuli rather, around selectable objects. That an object that is meaningful to you, that it then experiences a change. In other words, the stimulus generates a P300 response, which is a positive amplitude 300 millisecond after the associated stimulus, meaning that what we're able to achieve is essentially a binary yes, no, did I want to engage with that object or not engage with that object? And that's how we give people the ability to have this very basic hands-free control. In terms of interaction, there are other very interesting brainwaves. One of my favorites is the one called error-related negativity, which is an identifiable neural response when you recognize an error. A very fun example is also a semantic error-related negativity, where if you hear something or see something wrong, you also have an associated neural response. I think that there are other ways to think of BCI and look at other types of brainwave, like motor imagery, which are more imagined actions for control. But these are very hard things to do with EEG that I think that as we progress on the hardware and software side, we'll see more and more of. But what if I can have one last takeaway, which is we're going to start off with simple controls first, and we're going to then build on top of that to have more complex. That the telekinetic future where I think of something and then it actually interprets that thought is many years away, which I know is like annoying to hear, but I think it's helpful for us to set those expectations so that we know what's the target that we have to build towards.
And another question and points actually that we tried to summarize in kind of a one question. Do you see that in the future, kind of AR glasses, BCI, mobile devices be merged more in one?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that AR is one of the best new computing mediums that more than any other requires hands-free control. The AR is going to bring in a suite of control modalities like gesture control and voice and eye tracking, but it's going to be a neural input that adds, I think that fits that suite of control modalities in this aspect of quantified cognition and effective computing that gives us a new understanding from that medium.
So we do have many more questions, but we'll jump into the third talk right away to then finish with a Q&A with everybody on board. Once again, we have a lot of questions, engagement from the chat. So this is definitely awesome to see, and meaning that we'll have to do another Neurotech Gaming event or maybe more in depth on specific aspects. So people from the audience, if there's anything you want to dive deeper, please let us know so we can tailor an event with these kind of requests. So let's dive into the third speaker. So Eric Lloyd from Brink Bionics, take it away. I'm just gonna hand over the mic and let you share your screen.
Okay, thanks, Yannick. So find screen share. Okay, there we go. Yeah, first of all, really great talks. Really excited to hear and see about what Nurible's doing, and I think as soon as I'm finished playing Death Stranding, I think I'm going to have to pick up some of the tech from Flying Mollusk and give that game a try. So So my name is Eric Lloyd. I'm CEO and co-founder of Brink Bionics. We're a peripheral neural interface company that spun out of the University of Waterloo's Engineering Bionics Lab. And we started as a prosthetics company working on medical technology and have since shifted into developing consumer neural interface technology. So first I'll discuss a little bit of what we do at Brink Bionics and what we've been developing over the last year, why we chose certain biosignals to use in our technology versus others, why gaming and neurotech is so important, and where we see the gaming and neurotech field going and how it can influence other industries. And then lastly, since we comment among some questions from yesterday as well, as what's next for Brink Bionics, when can you actually get your hands on this type of neural interface technology that I'll be discussing today. So when it comes to high-end gaming hardware, whether it's your high-tech mouse, high frame rate monitors, keyboards, all these technologies try to reduce your latency, whether it's improved communication, optimizing button mapping, improving the frequency of the screen. And that's because in fast-paced action games, reaction time is absolutely critical. Most of us who play first-person shooters have been in this kind of situation. You come against an opponent, you're both looking at each other, and there are really two main factors that govern who's going to win this engagement. Whether or not you can aim and point your weapon at the target, and who's going to shoot first. All other factors being equal, if you have the best hardware, the best mouse with the lowest latency, the best monitor, you're going to win this engagement. You're going to shoot first. Now, there have been some limitations in gaming hardware technology. It's sort of reaching a plateau in terms of innovation. There's only so many functions you can add to a gaming mouse, only so much you can reduce the latency. And we see neurotech as the next leap in peripheral neural interface technology, which is why, for gaming, which is why we're developing Impulse. Impulse is a wearable neural interface glove that allows gamers to bind critical keyboard and mouse commands directly to their nervous system. So instead of clicking the mouse or pushing keyboard buttons, you perform small muscle twitch actions that end up being faster than key presses and the mouse by anywhere from 30 to 50 milliseconds on average. Now, in terms of how this is used with your current gaming suite, it doesn't replace any of your existing peripherals. Impulse is designed to be an extra layer on top of your existing gaming hardware that provides a means of activating those really time-critical controls. So how does Impulse actually work? So in your hand, there's these small muscles, and what Impulse measures is the electrical activity of these muscles when you perform different hand actions. So when nerve signals travel down your spinal cord from your brain and to your muscle, signals are generated in the muscle called motor unit action potentials in response to that neural command. We can capture those signals and determine your movement intentions very quickly and relay that right to your computer. So with Impulse, so basically when a muscle starts contracting, it takes time for that contraction to occur, and it takes time to generate enough tension to push a switch or perform an action. So instead of waiting for this to happen, Impulse grabs your movement intentions directly from your nervous system and relays them right to your computer, rather than waiting for you to actually move. So Impulse gathers these signals with these muscle signal electrodes from the glove, digitizes them, and passes them to our super low latency algorithms. This is what's unique about our technology compared to most other muscle signal technology that's been available over the past 8 years, in the sense that with conventional what's called EMG technology, these algorithms take anywhere from 100 to 300 milliseconds to gather and collect enough data to make a decision on what the algorithm thinks your movement intentions are. That application would be the equivalent of a gaming mouse having a third of a second delay between your click and an action on screen, which we see as one of the biggest reasons why this technology has not been widely adopted in gaming. A 300 millisecond delay when you're playing an FPS could kill you. You're not going to be able to succeed nearly as well because of that time delay. So what we're able to do is detect your intention within milliseconds and therefore detect your intention to move before the movement occurs. And then we relay those commands directly to your computer in the same way that your mouse or keyboard talks to your computer, so it talks directly to your operating system. So while you may move to click at the same time, Impulse will recognize that signal first and relay it to the computer. Now this video shows an early alpha version, so about a year old, of our technology. And in this video, we have two computers. The one on the right is hooked up to a regular gaming mouse. The one on the left is hooked up to our early version of Impulse. And we're running them on two identical machines. So you'll be able to see the real-time difference in reaction time that Impulse provides. So basically what you can see is that impulse is able to shoot every time for the gaming mouse. And this is where neural interface will really start to continue to push that progressive development of gaming hardware past the plateau that conventional peripherals are starting to reach. So why use muscle signals? A lot of the technology around today has been discussing the use of EEG and other biosignals for control applications. And a lot of the companies have done, I think, a really good job of evaluating critically the importance and the benefit of using their particular biosignals for their application. But when it comes to this type of fast-paced gaming application, reaction time and latency is so critical. Part of the reason as well that we use muscle signals is muscles as a signal generator are much more powerful than EEG signals. They're much easier to record. And the muscle signals themselves only have to pass through some small layers of soft tissue before reaching your sensor. So while some data is lost, there's still enough data collected by the sensor to be able to infer what the muscle is doing. So I'm going to dive a little bit into the limitations in this application of other biosignals like EEG. But first, I'm going to give a very brief overview of two different types of brain-computer interfaces, specifically looking at, again, EEG in this explanation. So one is dependent BCIs, which some of the other companies over the course of the weekend have discussed, which is basically where an input stimulus triggers some kind of response within the brain that then can be used and measured by a brain-computer interface to produce a control output. The alternative to that is independent BCIs, something more akin to imagining moving, where you don't need an input stimulus to elicit that neural response, and you can generate it spontaneously without the help of any kind of internal input. So for the purpose of my explanation of the limits of BCI and why we went with EMG, I'm going to be focusing on independent BCIs. So as I mentioned, muscle signals are very powerful relative to EEG, and they only have to pass through some soft tissues. Contrarily, EEG signals are much weaker. They're much lower powered signals, and they also have to pass through not only skin and connective tissue layers, the dura mater, they also have to pass through the skull, and the skull is not conductive. So by the time those signals reach outside the brain, or right outside the skull rather, they're much weaker and much more difficult to read. So while these types of non-invasive brain-computer interfaces can be used to read movement intentions for large movements, like thinking about moving my right hand or my left hand, you run into a problem when you try to do what we're doing, which is fine motor movement, in that most the review papers I've read on the subject have described it as being nearly impossible to read fine motor movement reliably and consistently for control from surface EEG with the current technology. Lastly is the problem I mentioned before, which is the time delay problem. So whereas with conventional muscle signal algorithms, it takes 1 to 300 milliseconds to process intention, whereas we do it maybe 3 or 5. EEG signals for this kind of motor imagery can take anywhere from 1 to 3 seconds to collect enough data to produce an output. And as a result, the application for fast-paced gaming pushes EEG aside as a possibility, at least with the available technology. That'd be again equivalent to your mouse or keyboard having a 1 to 3 second delay between the click and an input into your game. So these are the reasons why we ended up selecting EMG for our technology. The reason I bring this up is I like there being some kind of learning experience or learning application for a talk that I give. And I think in this case, this can help to shape for those that are interested in building their own neural interfaces, whether it's peripheral nervous system or central nervous system, to critically evaluate all the current tools and signal modalities that are available to us before we go down a path to develop a technology to solve a problem. So evaluating what biosignal is the best to solve a particular problem you want to build out a solution for. Now, in terms of neurotech and gaming, I mentioned this briefly at the beginning of my talk, where I talked about the plateau of innovation. There's only so many functions I can add to this gaming mouse before it's overwhelmed with buttons, and the latency is near sub-millisecond. And recent technology in gaming mice have reached sub-millisecond latency between that click and input into the computer. So there isn't much further where big leaps can come from. And that's where I see neurotech fitting in. Neurotech allows for an entirely new means of interfacing with our games and computers in such a way where it can continue to foster further innovation and development. If we're able to provide a 30 to 50 millisecond advantage with a peripheral nervous system interface, if you eventually get to sort of the Neuralink level of technology with a direct cortical implant, the performance augmentation beyond that will outperform even a peripheral nervous system interface. And that's what's really exciting about the potential that neurotech has in the gaming space. Second is one that comes up a lot because my research background came from bionic limb technology and building AI-based controls for bionic limbs. And that's inclusive technologies in gaming. One of the things that constantly comes up because it is an alternative means of interfacing with our computers is how can this technology help people with limited mobility, limb loss, paralysis to be able to interact with games with the same fidelity as someone who is physiologically typical or able-bodied. So that's another really important stream. The vision of the future I'd like to see is in 10 or 15 years down the road, if you're still someone who sticks to just using the old mouse and keyboard, someone with mobility limitations or paralysis with a direct cortical interface is going to be able to beat you every time. And that's the progression that we're seeing in this technology. And it's really cool to see, how much of an influence gaming's had on my own life in terms of the science fiction games I play, like Mass Effect and Deus Ex and Halo, and how they influence the technology that I wanted to build. I don't think anybody should be limited from having that inspiration and experience either. So Neurotech can help to facilitate that inclusivity within gaming. Lastly, is competition in the gaming market. Some of the other panelists brought this up earlier today, is that medtech innovation, and Slava put this in a very good point earlier, is that it's very slow, relatively speaking, to consumer tech innovation. There are a lot of barriers to entry for medical neurotech to push and enter the market. There's barriers to entry around approval because you're treating a medical condition, and as a result, the technology and innovation that reaches people is very slow. So you're unlikely to see a huge bleed through from the medically applicable neurotech, a lot of it being implanted, to consumer technology right away. But as consumer technology not having nearly as many barriers to entry, you'll have these faster innovation cycles where companies will be able to rapidly test and develop and release new technologies at a much faster rate than most other industries currently applying neurotech can achieve. And when you achieve this fast innovation and improved technologies, eventually that technology, if it's high performance enough, can be applied to gaming. And that has really strong implications as well. Gamers, and I know for myself as well, have really strong demand for high performance and reliable technology. If it works 8 times out of 10, then no gamer is going to use that for their daily gaming activities in conventional games like first-person shooters, because a command that only works 8 times out of 10 means you're going to make a mistake far more often than you otherwise would. So if you're building technology to meet this high demand for gamers in terms of the performance, reliability, and ease of use of that technology, those systems can rapidly bleed through into other industries like prosthetics, consumer neurotech, and robotic interfaces to facilitate growth in other industries as well. To look at it from the opposite perspective, coming from prosthetics, most bionic limb control systems that are starting to reach clinical applications usually have around 90 to 95% accuracy, somewhat depending on the user as well and their condition. While that may be effective for prosthetics, that technology coupled with conventional time delays that exist in EMG algorithms means that technology won't translate back to gaming. You really have to build technology for fast performance, high-paced gaming environments from the ground up, which is exactly what Brink Bionics is doing. And then that technology can bleed through into other industries. So speaking of near future neurotech, for Brink Bionics, our technology is releasing now in a closed beta. So we're shipping out our first units to our users, which is really exciting. Getting people to use our technology for the first time when we've spent so much time using it and refining it in a lab is really, really rewarding. And these users will be so critical in giving us the feedback we need for our planned launch around fall of this year. It's tentative right now, but this is our plan for our first pre-order launches. So you'll be able to purchase and get on board for early bird deals this year. So if you want to be able to first to find out about those deals and learn about and be the first to be one of the first gamers to map your commands directly to your peripheral nervous system, I recommend you sign up. We'll give occasional updates on our beta testing and on our development moving forward in our launch. And we're really excited for those of you that are interested in coming with us and making Neurotech the next standard in desktop gaming peripherals for fast-paced games. And just in closing, I want to thank the Neurotech X community for setting this up and for working so closely with the panelists in reaching to this event. I've attended some of the events in the past, and these have just always been really amazing experiences. And thank you to everybody who's attended and taken the time to watch all the talks today. I'm really excited that if we can keep doing these kinds of talks and discussions to show the gaming community where this technology can evolve from here. Thank you. And Yannick, I will pass it over to you and the other organizers.
It seems like Yannick has some issues with connection. Okay. I propose us to let's move to the Q&A then. So, Yannick, are you with us? All right. Yeah, please continue.
Back. I don't know what happened. I had the next slide full screen, and when you killed your full screen, it changes all the screen, and I was temporarily dark. So my apologies for that. The inconvenience of having multiple screen at once. So that was actually very, very interesting. We had many questions, obviously, on the tech side of things, and we kept more general question for the end. Let's just start with an easy one from Kevin Blair on Zoom. So Eric, I'm 94 and a keen Xbox gamer. I keep getting kicked in the ass by 12 years old. Can your tech help me?
That's the idea. I'm noticing even at 26 that my reaction time has started dropping. I can't compete with them either. So the idea in building Neurotech and bringing it into the fold is to level the playing field. So hopefully it can help provide you with an advantage as well.
And talking about delays, so someone on Zoom asked, since the delay difference is not that much, how can this tech be used? I mean, we are not using super fast computers or super fast internet. How does that faster reaction time fade away with those delays? So do you want to just explain a bit of the delay chain?
Sure. So when it comes to performing actions in games, speaking with both professional gamers and even gamers who play ranked matches at home, a lot of them can notice even a 10 millisecond difference in their reaction time. So if you talk to most gamers, anywhere from a 30 to 50 millisecond reaction time improvement is massive. To put that in perspective, I think it was Logitech last year released their Lightspeed technology for their gaming mouse, and that reduced the latency by maybe 10 milliseconds compared to competitors. So companies are investing so much money into building new technologies to just provide a slight sliver of an improvement. So yeah, when it comes to our daily life interfacing with computers, that time difference doesn't mean much. But when it comes to being the first to make that shot in a game, it makes a huge difference. In terms of how it factors into latency and everything, yeah, your internet connection, your latency and communication, I think that's what you're asking, can have an impact on the game. And this may help to cut down and curb some of that for particular actions. But the latency and communication is a different problem that we don't target with our technology directly.
Got it. Speaking of latency and devices, there is obviously an overlap with prosthetics, as you mentioned in your talk. So Kaiser Contreras, we ask on Zoom, will there be a crossover from game low latency devices to prosthetics? Do you have any plans to assist the development of prosthetics in the near future? So do you want to elaborate more on that side of things?
Sure. So we originally started as a prosthetics company developing AI-controlled bionic limbs. Part of the reason we shifted to gaming is part of what I talked about earlier, which is around the fact that, and I don't think I mentioned this point in particular, a larger market, a larger potential for funding the development of future technology allows that technology to move faster. So there is opportunity for our technology to bleed through and be, partner with prosthetic companies to license technology or give them access to those sorts of algorithms through some collaborations. But we don't have anything planned right now.
Got it. Let's just dive into the Q&A with all the panelists. I'm just gonna share my screen to just do a quick Neurotech X presentation while the team sort all the questions that we'll be asking. But I'm just gonna ask the panelists to be ready to open their video and their mic in a sec, because we do have some people from the gamer industry that might not be necessarily acquainted with Neurotech X and what we do. So I'm just gonna do the 2-minute spiel on the organization. So I'm gonna share my screen. For those who've been with Neurotech X for a while, you can grab a sip of water. You know the spiel already. So Neurotech X, let me start with the right slide. So Neurotech X is an international neurotech community. The mission is to facilitate the advancement of the field, which is a broad statement. So in order to do that, we have 3 pillars: community, education, and innovation. So the first pillar with community, the idea is to bring people together like we're doing today, making sure that we have people that are connected, that know each other, who's doing what in the field. The second pillar is education. So we try to provide resources, educational material, whether it's more scientific by nature, whether it's more technical, workshops, hands-on skills, or on the business ethics and just kind of like discussion to be more educated about the field. And once people are connected, educated, then we believe that they can go and have an impact on the field, which is the third one. So in order to achieve that, we do have several initiatives like our Neurotech X chapters that are doing local events or online. Given the current situation, we do have student clubs targeted mainly at undergrads so that they can start exploring neurotech as early as possible in their career. We do have Neurotech X Slack, our online platform, EDU, the newsletter, and Neurotech X services, which provide consulting and recruiting services. So if your company has any need, we do have a lot of talent, a big pool of with the community. So we try to facilitate that matchmaking to find whatever needs the company has to solve the problems. So we do have a wide audience all around the world with different chapters, 20 chapters. We've done many events so far. On Meetup, we do have 15,000 members. On our Slack community, now we're at 4,600 members. So join the community if you enjoy the talk and want to be more engaged in these discussions. So I'll stop it there for now. I'm just going to mention the Neurobar once again, that after the event, we'll take a 30-minute break and then we'll resume with the Neurobar. So on my time zone in Montreal, it's going to be 3 p.m. Depending on where you are on the planet. So it's in 40 minutes-ish from now. So 30 minutes after the end of the event. So with that, we'll dive right into the Q&A. So I'll ask the panelists to come back live with me. And we've grouped the questions. So obviously some of the questions were asked yesterday as well. So we'll ask some of them because clearly they are important. They matter to the community. So we'll try to get a bit of your angle on these questions, namely about things like ethics timeline. But we'll try to bring some new questions as well for people who attended both days. So let's just start with the public fear that we might have towards neurotech and BCI in general. So the question that we have is, how can we as an industry best address the public's fear of BCI technology? If you feel that such a thing exists, if not, comment on that side as well. So who want to take the first stab at it?
I'm more than happy to talk about this topic. I think the socialization, in other words, making BCI a more commonly understood concept is critical for its expansion. That there's so many ways to do this. I mean, the bare minimum is just to talk about it more and more and have events like these, and then to have creatives. And this is where the gaming historically has had a big impact in making what is considered emerging or not real technology. So I think things as simple as that will help us progress in that direction. And it's not about an overnight solution, it's about progress.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, the more we can educate the general public about this, the better on all fronts. I really loved Adam's point about the inflated expectations for the technology as being a big barrier to entry, because that's so true. That is so much the case, and people are so quick to jump to conclusions, both in terms of just this technology is going to be amazing. It's going to read my thoughts and I'm going to be able to create a video game just based on what I think of, which, don't get me wrong, is totally cool, but definitely not what we're talking about. And then the other end is the inflated, sense of fear of what this technology will do. Oh my gosh, the government's going to mind control me now. It's well, no, that's not really what's going to happen either. And I think it's just a matter of, I love science fiction as much as anyone, but I think it's a matter of also kind of talking about, but seriously, this is what we can do now. Here are the great things that can happen. Here are the bad things that can happen. Be educated about it, plan accordingly and go from there.
I think to your point, it comes up similar to the talk or people's fear around artificial intelligence as more having a Hollywood view of what the movies have portrayed in that technology. And it's almost always negative. It's almost always, you're going to become this unfeeling cyborg when you implant tech into your body or modify yourself with tech. And in reality, A, we're far from that, and B, there's a bit more of a deeper conversation on how that can actually improve human empathy. But it's not going to quite fall into place like Hollywood paints it.
I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Lawnmower Man, but it's a movie based on virtual reality and brain-computer interfaces, and definitely does not give either field a good look. So I can definitely appreciate Eric's sentiments.
But that being said, this may be a question coming up later, so forgive me if I'm jumping the gun on this. I talked about how this technology and coming to gaming is inevitable. That's not 100% true. There is something that keeps me up at night, and that's people's first impression with this technology on a mainstream level being negative, right? Like that if people learn to distrust it because it's put in the wrong hands and it does the wrong thing and it doesn't treat this incredibly personal, incredibly sensitive, intimate data, with the respect that it needs to be treated with, no one's going to trust it. And we will never see this technology progress to where it can in our lifetimes. That will shut it down so quick. And so that really scares me. And that for me creates an urgency for those of us who do want to use the data correctly and responsibly and ethically to create products and release the mainstream. So that's people's first impressions with it, and create sort of the stage for all the amazing good that this can do before it's the well is tainted by someone being reckless with it.
So true. Nurible has a relationship with Europe's largest think tank, which I won't even dare to pronounce, but I'm happy to follow up the name of it. And they have a project called Ethics in AI, and I've had the pleasure to speak with their project lead. And admittedly, they were saying that their take on AI, they'd been focusing their case studies too much on the negative aspects of it and haven't done as much on the positive. And ultimately, what the point boiled down to in terms of its ethical applications is the data directly impacting the person where the data is being derived from, or is it giving value to someone else, especially without their express permission? And I think if we use that as a guiding post, it'll help us steer our work into that ethical future. And that, to Aaron's point, like a question I've gotten since the unveiling of the Awakening is your technology stealing my secrets? Can it get my social security password? And the answer time and again is no. And it's hard to explain the difficulties of EEG and neurotechnology succinctly, but the fact that people are privy to their brain data being accessed by someone else means that I think we have a responsibility and obligation to respect that and appreciate it, even if some of the more technological people know that, at least in the short term, there aren't really maleficent uses of that data.
And adding to your points as well, I think a lot of people have already, on the data side, you talked about the concern mishandling BCI, but on the data side, so many companies have already mishandled people's personal data to a gross degree and completely eliminated any trust in companies or corporations handling data. So I think when it comes to this, if people better understood, at least looking at academia, how careful academia is in handling data, when you collect data from a person, any mention or of their name or identification factors are completely eliminated. It's stored on encrypted servers. Like there's these huge processes in place, and labs can get in a lot of trouble if they don't follow those. So there almost needs to be policy in place before this becomes a problem, so the companies are forced to adhere or suffer really, really extensive consequences for failing to handle that data.
To throw in a grenade, an apple of discord, if you will, for controversy, playing devil's advocate, having been still a startup, but being able to survive over the past 5 years, it's really difficult to balance. Am I going to direct my resources to make sure that everything is following a standardized process, or I'm going to hack my way to get to an endpoint, knowing that there are limited resources? I have a response for that, but I just wanted to at least give it a different perspective.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear your response. That's a very good point.
Which is that I think that it comes down to intention and conscious development. That if what you're doing intentionally, knowing where you're going and knowing, actually maybe more importantly, what are the negative ramifications of what happens if you develop unintentionally, it can help guide what you're doing, so that, again, using a startup hacker approach, you can use means that aren't necessarily as policy red tape driven as a laboratory environment, which is very arduous to development. And it's why companies can move much faster than labs sometimes. But while maintaining that sense of urgency and like the importance of what you're doing.
And I'd add to that also just being as communicative to your users as possible about, the risks as well, and saying, this is what we're doing, this is why, this is, what's going to happen to your data. And I think, as long as people know and they like feel like they're opting into it, then I think you can really give yourself a lot of freedom and flexibility. I think the big issue is when you're doing stuff that they don't know, and sometimes as a, a small startup developer, you make mistakes, bugs happen. And so, sometimes you do run into issues where there might be something that happens that you don't know about, so you can't communicate it. So, always go back and rectify that by communicating this is what happened and being very transparent about it, across the board, no matter what the situation is. And, that's so important, I think, and especially when we're in this uncharted territory.
This is we could definitely dive in, and especially on the ethical aspect, data for hours. One thing that I need to ask, because we're already kind of at the 1 hour mark, but I feel that we're just getting in kind of like some juicy, valuable information for the audience. Would you be willing to stay a bit longer, like another 10 minutes, that we would extend just to go over some of the questions? Yes, I know I'm asking a bit of your time, but I feel that in the flow, and I definitely don't want to interrupt the flow going between you guys. I think that they were a really relevant point. So quickly on the just to wrap up on the ethics side of things, what are your thoughts on the impact that this tech will have on individuals with who lives with experience of PTSD, anxiety, TBI? Will it impact negatively, overwhelm the user, and how do you control for this?
I guess I'll start with that. I know with Nevermind, there's often some confusion because the narrative of it deals with PTSD and trauma. But the game itself in its current form is not meant to necessarily treat people who are experiencing PTSD or high anxiety, clinical anxiety. It is meant to sort of educate people about those conditions, but it's not yet in a state that's meant to be used as a treatment. That being said, that is certainly a goal we have for Nevermind, is to adapt it so that it can be used in those settings. And, so it's something that we think about a lot. And in doing so, we want to make sure that if adapting it from an entertainment / wellness product to something that's more clinically, beneficial, that's working with experts, as game developers, we have certain expertise, but we want to make sure that we have the input of people who are psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists, and making sure that everything is being done in a very respectful way and correctly so that it doesn't cause more harm than good. And so I think it's just making sure, you have all the right voices involved in it. And that's really the best way to kind of invent new things, in a responsible way. Yeah, so I think it's just being conscious of it and making sure that you're, doing it right by consulting outside of your field of expertise.
And I think as well, to build on sort of the mental health treatment point, one of the benefits that BCIs, and this may result, and I'm not sure EEG is the right technology if you're looking more at MEG or implanted devices, but the potential to get clear quantitative metrics on mental health disorders as opposed to I feel, I think, will be critical in the future in treating mental health conditions. But right now, you can measure your heart rate and get a clear signal. You can analyze the waveform to look at, the atypical behaviors of the heart that are conducive to certain heart problems. Hopefully in the future, BCI will lead us to being able to do that for the brain as well.
I have 3 related points. One, that when you're talking about EEG, I see like a great parallel with the state of EEG and the state of heart rate maybe decades ago or a decade ago, where it's a technology that we know exists, but we are just making sense of it now and learning how to really apply it into everyday type like applications. And then in regards to the state of neurotechnology and its relationship to treating more cognitive disorders, I have an annoying answer and I have a non-annoying answer. The annoying answer is that, again, it comes down to intention. As technology progresses, it is going to be on the mindset of the developer and how they apply the technology that brings about some kind of change. And to Eric's point, when you start to obtain quantified aspects of cognition, you're likely equipping the field with tools to get there, but it's going to be on where people take those tools and how they apply them that we'll see that effect. The less annoying answer is that I know from working with the military that they are actively working on ways to use biomarkers to help with PTSD treatment. So in terms of application, it is being actively, if not at least executed on at the moment, definitely being thought about. So great question and responses from my fellow co-panelists.
Since you opened the door, Eric, let's dive into one of the other questions, obviously, about the invasive BCI and the invasive neurotech. Might not be in the next year or two that we'll see that, especially in the gaming industry, but we got to talk about it now that Elon Musk, and just I think today or yesterday that he posted on Twitter that if you can solve problem with the phone and things like that, please contact Neuralink to get a job or something like that. So definitely with Elon Musk and other people going more invasive, how do you see the invasive neurotech and the gaming world merge together?
So I think there's some opportunities for minimally invasive neurotech. One of the things that I've been interested in my research when I was looking into EMG was things like implanted myoelectric sensors or things that's called transdermal EMG. So basically almost using piercings in the skin that are really just like ear piercings or anything else to record information off of without putting anything inside the body. So that can be sort of the healthy medium between invasive and non-invasive technologies. And I think even more than an engineering problem, I think we're running into a social problem. The idea of someone getting a whole board into their head and having a high density array implanted. I mean, for someone like me, I love the idea of interfacing my body technologies. All hats are off. I'm all good with that kind of technology if it's proven to be safe. But a lot of people aren't. So I think having the proliferation of invasive neurotech through society, I think will be difficult until you can get it minimally invasive enough that it's either a piercing or it's in the state where you can get an injection of micro machines that would move themselves into the brain and transmit data wirelessly out to an external processing system. So it has to be so minimally invasive, I think, for the average person to use that they wouldn't be scared of the surgical implications. I think even if it takes on a procedure where it's as safe as LASIK eye surgery, then you might start to see more adoption. And it seems like Neuralink might be headed in that direction, but I don't want to speak for them.
This is purely my opinion, but I think that what these big names and heavy investments are doing is largely a double-edged sword. That it is so important to have big names place big bets because that helps steer the general direction and momentum of the field. But I also say that the other edge of that is this idea of inflated expectations. That Eric's point about the social understanding of implants are spot on. That's why Nurible, we don't even consider non-invasive. We know that we need to make non-invasive systems work and socialized before we'll even have that reality of invasive systems. That, yeah, it's challenging because you have these big names who are placing big bets, but they are also bringing what they're saying they're going to deliver back, rolling back the capabilities that they started with, and now have to reduce them to a point where some companies are even just doing non-invasive where they said they were going to do invasive. So I think it's a thorny subject and should be handled delicately.
Yeah, I think the focus should just be on baby steps. Let's, get the non-invasive technology in a space where people are using it every day, and kind of the visions that we've talked about throughout the last couple of days are kind of executed upon. And then we can talk about invasive, because there's this technology question, right? And the ethics question, and all those are certainly extremely important. But there's also the user interaction question. Even with virtual reality, which has been around in a very tangible sense for a while now, we're still figuring out how do you do a menu, and very simple interaction user interface challenges we're still working on, so we're not there yet, to have something that's, kind of fused with you and creates this whole new sense of interaction. I think it's cool that we probably will be at some point, but let's start with what we have now before we get too worried about then.
I couldn't agree more. And some people in the chat mentioning like Elon Musk, and this is kind of he's becoming the person we point to, but not necessarily for him specifically, but just kind of like the general, because five years ago, we wouldn't talk about that in a public way of like invasive technology necessarily. It was more of the research, the brain gate projects of this world and things like that, a research lab. But now the discussion is being made on the public. So Neurotech X wants to have some opinion. I think that you guys nailed it in the fact that we need to bring it a notch down a little bit in this inflated expectation. So it was more about putting the platform to hear you guys talk about that aspect, which now is on public discussion forums. So, but we're far from there, and we're definitely not going to implant things in our brain in the near future for entertainment just yet. But another question about is it a realistic possibility that biofeedback and relevant technologies can be used for full immersion, sort of this aspect of being fully immersed of players in the games they play? So current games right now. So do we need to redesign games, or could we bring that aspect of full immersion of current existing games?
Like, is the question like, if, you know, someone came out with a biofeedback controller tomorrow, could we hook that up to the existing games that are currently out there now? Is that? Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, you know, in some level, you know, the idea of dynamic difficulty, I think, can apply to any game of any genre, you know, maybe with a couple exceptions, but for the most part, that's, to me, that feels just so obvious, you know, and I think any game could, benefit from that. You know, having more like specific interactions with it, you know, kind of the way that like Nevermind does with like the fear and stress reactions in the environment, you know, that's something that you probably want to think about, you know, designing from the ground up so that it's not a gimmick that you just slap on, you know, and then that's the case with any cool game feature, you know, it's, so, you know, I would say that maybe that's not the best design decision to do something more fancy that in a game that wasn't intended for that interaction, but I think it's certainly possible for some titles, for sure.
I mean, I'm not coming from a game development background, but I think when it comes to immersion, I think you need to get better understand what do you mean by immersion. Does that mean sensory feedback? Does that mean emotional immersion? Like you can feel and empathize and like feel what's going on in the game, and there's actual stimulation directly into the brain for sensory feedback. Like I think it depends on what kind of immersion that we're talking about. I think it's still a very personal term that people use. I mean, I can be immersed sitting there for hours on end. I know I'm going to be when Cyberpunk comes out. I'm going to be sitting there immersed for hours on end playing that. Or there can be immersed whereby you have a full suit, like with haptic suit from Tesla Suit, where you have a full sensory feedback array on your body. So I think it really depends on the definition.
I'm going to defer to the game development experts. So I agree.
I do want to add that, you know, immersion is a really tricky word. In fact, I kind of just glossed right over that in the question, so apologies for that. Because it's used so frequently, and there's just so many different ways to define it. And you know, one thing that I like to remind, you know, gamers and game developers that, you know, when we talk about immersion in games is that you don't need fancy technology to create an immersive experience. I mean, you can read a book and be completely immersed, you know, and that's just paper and ink, you know. I think it's, you know, I think some people look at this future tech and think this is what's going to make gaming immersion. They use it almost as a conceptual crutch. And I think that can be very, you know, that can lead one astray. So I always like to caution people from that it's not the technology that makes something immersive. It can be a wonderful tool in amplifying an experience when it's, you know, something's designed with that in mind. But, you know, the storytelling and the aesthetics and sort of the classic tools that humans have been using to create these immersive, you know, stories and environments are really going to be what's key if you want to create something that's an immersive, engaging experience.
I totally agree with that. Since Neurotech X is about development, education, and building skills in the field, my last general question is actually someone from the chat who asked that. How does a young, passionate BCI plus ML developer get directly involved with the field and add value to such companies as your company? So to get an internship or a job, or to get at the level you guys are for a younger demographic in the audience, what would you suggest in terms of skill building and paths?
I've hired a lot of you, and I get this question all the time, to a point where actually Nurible, we just put out a blog post last month on how to break into the neurotech career, which I'm happy to share in the chat in a moment. But to answer your question directly, it's looking at what are the parts that build a BCI. So focusing on neuroscience is obviously helpful, but from our perspective, I think that the big innovations will come in signal processing innovation. So learning things like electrical engineering, computer science, algorithm development, but on a technical side, but then all the way on the art and creative side to user design and human to computer interaction. Things like that, I think, will provide you with the core logic tools to think about how to solve for the problems that currently exist in the BCI field. And in terms of practically finding out these internships and positions, Neurotech X is one of the best places to go for it. It's nonprofit, so you know that the companies are getting all equal opportunities. It's one of the largest provider of neuro jobs. In regards to laboratory positions, I would recommend finding labs that are doing work that are directly within your interests and reaching out to the PIs, the principal investigators of those labs, to, if not at least get involved, to at least make yourself known to those individuals, so that as you do mature throughout your academic or professional development, you have those contacts and you're able to knock on those doors when ready. And I'll share that blog post too.
I think Adam put it amazingly. There's one point I think I'd add to that, which is when it comes to building deep tech, which a lot of neurotech falls into the category of deep technology, where you need a lot of startup costs to get it going. If you have ideas or a field that you want to work in, starting out of it seems that everybody on the panel today has started in some way from the research sector. It's a great way to get some of the early development on an idea done and investigated to get strong metrics behind it before you look at commercializing something. If you're looking to go into an area of neurotech that is still largely experimental with consumer applications.
And I would say on the gaming side, if you're interested in, making games for this on the content creation side, it's really hard. So I wish I had here's the 3-step solution to doing that. And I don't have that, unfortunately. I think Nevermind never would have gotten made if it didn't start at a university, because we never would have had the resources to create even the proof of concept had we started out in the industry. We luckily had the cocoon, the warm cocoon of a year of academic development, surrounded by amazingly brilliant, professors to guide us, and a team of student developers, and that's how it got made. And so we're very, very, very lucky. And it's really hard to replicate that in the real world. That said, I think it is, it's changing. It's getting better little by little every day. So I don't mean to discourage, but I think it's going to require a lot of perseverance, a lot of grit. And, I think in connecting with a lot of other people, because there's a lot of people who are super hyped about this. It's just a matter of all of us finding each other and getting together and figuring out how to get the resources to make the game. So, go to gaming conferences like Games for Change, which actually just happened last week. But there'll be another one next year that'll be amazing, I'm sure. And there's a whole community there. There's IndieCade as well, which is a really great community of indie game developers who are always working on cool stuff. I think being involved in those areas will definitely kind of help, get your foot in the door and put yourself in the position to have all the pieces aligned so that you're also lucky enough to kind of make it happen and be in the space.
Awesome. That I totally agree with all of you. And I think it started with also making projects, side projects, just developing skills so that you can show what you can do. And then when you go knock at different doors, you have a portfolio to show for. So I want to thank the amazing speakers we had today. I know that we went over time a little bit. I hope that you all appreciated the information. It's going to be recorded, it is recorded. It is on YouTube and will be on YouTube, so we'll be able to reuse that valuable information. So Eric, Adam, Aaron, thank you very much for being here today with us and sharing your passion for the field. I want to ask, and leaving the audience asking a question that was actually targeted to the panel, but I'll target it back to the audience. What is your favorite game which has all the advantages that a game should have? So as you say goodbye in the chat, can you let us know what's your favorite game and why, and what is important in a game for you? And while you do that, and I'm taking the speakers, I'll just do the announcement for the Neurobar that is coming up. So if you want more of these discussions, you want to engage more one-on-one, the Neurobar is not a lecture. It's not a speaker format kind of thing. It's you show up, you bring a drink, and glass of water is fine. Tea, coffee, beer, depending on the time zone you're in. And we just have casual conversation with the people that are there. So let me that's the last screen sharing of the day as we leave. So the Neurobar, so you have the link on Slack. Otherwise, you can just send an email to info@neurotechx.com and you'll send you the link. And if you're interested, as we mentioned, doing projects in the space, there is the Neurotech Cup competition going on. NeurotechX is a partner on this competition. So neurotechcup.com. If you want to submit a project around Neurotech Gaming, I think that would be a wonderful platform. You just form a team, submit a project, and can win a prize. So with all that, we hope to see you at the next event. And that's a wrap for the Neurotech Gaming event. I thank you very much for attending. And if you have any feedback, comment, feel free to reach to the team or email at info@neurotechx.com. Thank you, everyone, for attending today.